It was a couple weeks ago.
The cookies out there. Turn down free Panera cookies. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Kathleen O'Dell. I'm the Community Relations Director for the Springfield-Greene County Library District, and I wanted to welcome you all to this evening. We have kind of a special event, we think. Because of Banned Books Week, we thought it would be important to not only talk about book challenges in public libraries, but in academic and school libraries, since that's been an issue in the area between Stockton and Republic. This is part of a week-long series in the district to observe the National Banned Books Week, as I said. And whether you call it banning or restricting books or censorship, we think the result is the same. Access to those materials is denied. And that's something that librarians and many others challenge wherever it occurs. We believe that the library is a perfect venue for discussing issues of censorship or banning, since libraries exist to provide ideas and information for all who wish to read and access them, no matter if those ideas are considered unorthodox or unpopular. So I would like to introduce our moderator and our panel. Moderator is Brian Fogel, who many of you know from his long history of volunteer work and civic and philanthropic leadership across the region, and many different careers that led him to now. Our panelists are Dr. Norm Ritter, Superintendent of Springfield Schools; Andy Hosmer, Springfield Public Schools Board of Education member and an attorney; Dr. John Lilly, Willard School District Board of Education member; David Liss, he's also a columnist for the News Leader; David Liss, Nixa Public Schools Director of Technology and Strategic Planning Process; and Karen Huff, Reading Instructor for Ozarks Technical Community College. Carrie. We do want you to know that the library extended an invitation to the Republic School District superintendent and at least one member of the board, and we extended it twice, once before their most recent meeting and then once after the meeting where they made their decision, and they respectfully declined to participate. So, with that said, Brian, you have the podium.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks to the audience for coming out tonight. I know we're competing with the Cardinals and several other things going on, so thanks for being here, and also thanks to the panelists. I also want to say thanks to the library district. I think our library district certainly is one of the gems of the community, one of those things we're very, very proud of. It enhances the quality of life in our community. We're just so fortunate to have such a great staff and board and strong library district. It truly betters all of us. I still remember reading my first Ray Bradbury book, The Martian Chronicles, and it had me hooked as a young boy in that first chapter about the rocket summer. And that book for me opened worlds and doors that I never imagined. It had an impact on me then, as did subsequent books I read going forward. The advancement of civilization, in fact, accelerated greatly with the advent of the printing press. That led directly to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. I think hopefully everybody in this room would agree that books and literature enhance our lives and certainly expand our mind. However, we're not all going to agree which books are classic and which books are rubbish, and whether The Martian Chronicles falls in either of those categories. And most certainly, I think we would all agree that all books are not appropriate for everyone, whether by age or difficulty or even taste. But therein lies the rub, I think. How do we keep open opportunities to learn, grow, and be challenged while recognizing differing individual and community tastes and values? That's the purpose of this discussion this evening. My hope for this evening is that we can have a thoughtful, civil discussion about a very sensitive matter. Unfortunately, that seems to be a rarity this day and age. However, I firmly believe that people of goodwill can have differing opinions and can share those with passion and yet be restrained. I'm on the Civility Project Committee, many of you might have heard about, My board has passed the civility resolution, as has the library district. And I just want to read these 10 tenets that we have all agreed to abide by. And I hope we would abide by these today. Our motto for that initiative is called Be Civil, Be Heard. For to me, that's the whole purpose of civility, is that those with weak and strong voices can be heard equally. Those tenets are that I hope we all practice tonight and every day. Are be attentive, acknowledge others, be inclusive, listen, respect other views, speak out with courage, act with compassion, give and accept constructive feedback, treat your environment with respect, and be accountable. Those are the tenets that many of our organizations, including the county and the city council, have also agreed to abide by. So with that context, let's introduce our first question today. And I think to get the discussion going, it might be helpful if each of you would briefly discuss your school or school district's policy when a book or material in the curriculum is challenged by a concerned citizen or student, and include things like, for example, who is involved in considering the matter and how it is discussed and resolved, and how the challenging party is informed of that discussion and decision, and is this policy any different for curriculum books versus library books. And with that, we'll just start on this end this time. And Andy, if you can go, or you and Norm tag team, however you want to do that, and we'll go on down the road.
I'm a board member of Springfield Public Schools. Obviously, Dr. Fred Ritter is here, so I don't know if Dr. Ritter, you want to talk about our policy. We just amended it, I believe.
Yes, we did. The policy is policy KLB, and it's basically it's a policy where it says reconsideration of both library book and or instructional material. Okay, so that's both. And really, the policy, anyone who feels has a concern about any material along that line, we have a form that we use to ask them to fill it out. We really ask them the level of understanding of the material in that form, and then eventually we ask them to look into to list the specific objections that they might have. And so really the policy goes along that line as far as guiding them through that, and the form follows that policy. What's really important in that policy is really the third piece of information is that what would you like your library or school to do about this work? In other words, what is it exactly you want to do? So first of all, we ask them to list and be very accurate as to what their concern is, and then what they'd like to have us do it. And it says, do not assign or lend to my child. Return it to the staff selection committee and department for reevaluation. Withdraw it from all readers, students, as well as my child. And then maybe there's another reason. And so that's what we ask them to do. So we ask them to submit the form to wherever their concern is. And so if it's at a site, the library site, that's what we ask them to submit it to. And then eventually at the site, there is a review committee set up by the principal at the site to look at the form, and then to consider that along with a committee that is shaped there. And usually a committee consists of 5 people, instructional staff, librarian, etc. And then they make a recommendation to the material, and then there's an appeal process all the way up to the school board, to make it short.
Okay. And just to follow up on what Dr. Ritter said, the first part of our policy talks about the fact that when we choose to put something in our libraries, that's done after careful consideration. It's done with the school administrators there, it's done with parental involvement, it's done with the community's involvement. So we take a lot of time in choosing and selecting what goes into our libraries. So you would hope that you take that equal amount of time if somebody challenges something that you have carefully chosen as being appropriate for kids. So it's not a situation where a truckload of books is dumped into the library and then somebody pulls up a book and says, you know, this one's crazy, because we've carefully chosen what goes in our library. So I think that's an important component of the policy as well.
Okay, thanks, Andy. David, do you want to talk about NICSA?
We mirror that same KLB policy. We subscribe to the Missouri School Board Association's policies. We do tweak them for our own district. The only thing that I would expand upon, everything that Dr. Ritter has outlined is the same in our policy. We do have the selection committee. That selection committee does get back with the complainant, and and many times it's at that point that the complainant is satisfied. If they're not satisfied, then they can appeal it to the school board, but it doesn't directly go to the school board unless there's an appeal. The one thing that I wanted to make mention of is that during that process, the materials stay in circulation. They do not come out of circulation until a decision is made to take them out of circulation, and that there's three things that can come out of any formal complaint. The material can be retained without restriction, the material can be retained with restriction, or the material can be removed. And so at the point that the committee makes their decision, they get back with the complainant. If the complainant wants to appeal that decision, it goes to the school board, and the school board's decision is fine.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. John, how about Willie?
Well, I have to give my standard disclaimer. I got invited here because I'm a columnist for the news leader, but I happen to be on the school board in Willard. But I am not an official spokesman. The president and the superintendent are generally the official spokesman. So this is kind of my opinions, and I'll try to give the proper what we do at Willard. And it is, we have not, as I understand, this is just my third year on the board, we haven't had anybody challenge any book for many years. So it was well before my time that they had the last challenge. And again, we have, similar Missouri School Board Association type of criteria that we use for picking the library books. And as I understand, we have a similar type of, if somebody has some question on a library book, again, the board would form a committee of various interested parties, including teachers, board members, administrators, parents, and they would do an evaluation and bring back a recommendation to the board.
Okay, great. And Carrie, from OTC's perspective?
Well, being at the post-secondary level, I don't have all these stipulations and all this legal expertise these individuals have. I just come from an instructor's perspective. I teach developmental reading to students. Most of them are traditional age 18 to 22. And so I have a considerable amount of freedom in the choices that I make in the classroom. And this semester is a pilot program that we're starting at OTC. I don't know, a lot of universities have the freshman experience literature book that they'll read together. So I'm piloting that program this year, and we chose the Kite Runner. And it's been an interesting experience. I have yet to be officially challenged, and I haven't banned the book yet, but there have been some concerns from some students. So it's just a different scenario that I come from my perspective. So.
Thanks. And I would tell the members of the audience, we will have time for questions at the end if you want to ask our panelists some questions as well. Following up on that, Carrie, we'll start over on your end. And maybe it hasn't happened to you, John. It sounds like it hasn't happened, at least during your tenure. But if you've had a specific time when a concerned citizen or parent has challenged a book or material, what were those reasons and how did you resolve it?
Okay, I think the reason for my invitation was because there was, we have one of the students, it wasn't an official challenge, but she has been extremely offended by the Kite Runner, because if you have any knowledge of the Kite Runner, it's set in Afghanistan, and the discussion of the Islamic religion in the book was offensive to her. And and I must tell you too that it's all done in a guided reading situation where they read a chapter or two and we discuss it, and and then there's some language in it that some have found offensive, and your interpretation is sexually explicit in this book. So it's been an interesting experience. So I'm still in the process of thinking about this through.
Okay, thanks.
we really haven't had, I think the last one was 10 or 11 years ago, and I believe that they made a decision to keep the book in the library, and whoever was the complainant was okay with the decision.
Okay, great. Norm?
We've had several, but the latest one was really tied to profanity and language, and he came as a complainant to the site. The site considered it and very similar, retained it in the library, and however, the parent had the right to make sure that their child did not check it out, and so that was the latest one. One that did get to my office 3 years ago, probably, was one that was very similar with profanity, and given the parent the option for the child to pick another book in its place, seemed to satisfy the parent, and everything was fine. So those are a couple that I remember.
Okay, great. David?
We've had 2 in the last 5 years that I'm aware of, and 2 different age groups, still elementary, but they had 2 different outcomes. And so we did have one, it was called The Giver. It was in an intermediate school, and it was age-appropriate material is why the complainant had brought it forth. And the committee's outcome was satisfactory for the complainant, and it was that they decided to retain it with restrictions so that 5th graders would not check out the book, but 6th graders could. And then another one was, many of you may be familiar with the Arthur books, the Arthur series. And that was in one of our elementary libraries, and it was offensive to a mother that Arthur had glasses and that he was referred to as Four Eyes in the book. And so that was brought forth before the committee looked at all of the issues surrounding that in the complaint. The committee decided to retain that with no restrictions, and the complainant was satisfied with that.
Okay. And I think you maybe answered this, but just in the light of the controversy we read about, certainly in Republican Stockton, that made not only local news but some national attention, have you seen any increase in inquiries or about the policy? And we'll start maybe down Andy or Norm and go back that way.
Really, the only thing we've seen is media inquiries.
Okay.
That's about it. And we had, occasionally we got a call saying, has anybody found any complaints from the community? Asking that question, not media, but from the community, with no reason. They just wondered if they found complaints. So that's all we had.
Just more curiosity, but.
And what I've heard in the community is, you're not doing that. And kind of that, let's hope Springfield's not, kind of following this lead.
Okay.
What they kind of perceive as a knee-jerk reaction to satisfy someone that was obviously angry about something.
Okay.
Nothing in next.
Okay, John? Nothing. No increase or carry? Okay, good.
If I may, by the way, if I may.
Sure, oh,
Right.
please.
We have Calvin Pampering here, Dr. Pampering, and also Robin Hageman with us, Dr. Hageman. Have we had any complaints from that?
I haven't had any this school year.
Because they get it twice.
Yeah. How do you balance your library's role or the school's role with the parent's responsibility to supervise a child's use of the library? Terry, we'll start with you.
Probably doesn't really apply to me.
Sure,
in
yeah.
the community college setting because they are considered adults. And,
Right.
So I haven't had any parents challenge. But it's not beyond the realm of possibility because parents are involved in the post-secondary experience. So, it's very likely I could have someone challenge me. Haven't yet.
Yeah, okay, good. John?
We haven't, again, not having had any activity on this since I've been on the board.
Yeah.
What is the proper role? It was, I'm doing a little research. The latest Supreme Court decision, which was the PICO decision back in '82, they made a distinction between the classroom and the library, and they give more discretion with curriculum and in the classroom, and they erred more on the side of First Amendment when it's in the library. Again, I have a little trouble seeing what the difference is. But one of the things that they mentioned is the in loco parentis, where the school board acts in the place of the parent while the child is in the school. So that's one of the functions of the board, is to act in the as the parent would. We've got, we've got a school board policy that says these are the kind of things that we look for in our curriculum books and in our library books. And it's kind of a standard policy. So, yeah, we always, I'd always err on the side of, if the parent wanted something, especially if it was in the library, you have to take their feelings into the mix. But you've got a bunch of directives, and then when the Supreme Court came down with the PICO decision, they really didn't give any good directions, and that was a problem with the thing, because it really threw it kind of back into the laps of the school boards. And a lot of some of the problems that they had, and the reason that some of those got up to the Supreme Court, is because the school boards did dumb things. They just randomly said, no, we're going to take these books out of the library, or they had a committee and ignored their recommendations. They formed a committee and then just completely ignored their recommendations. So a lot of times the school board got into trouble by ignoring their own rules. And that's why I think, if you have rules that are set out and that the parents can see, and you follow those rules, I think the parents are going to generally go along with it.
Okay. More? You, Andy? Andy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, he's a parent.
Yeah. Right?
I was just going to say that, and Dr. Lilly made the point about the PICO decision. I've actually got it on my iPad. I've been reading through it because I think it is one of the preeminent cases in the Supreme Court. But one of the things they talk about is, you talk about that balance, is children don't give up their First Amendment rights when they walk into the schoolhouse. And part of that First Amendment right is the right to be well informed, and the right to explore, and the right to find things, and they don't give up that right when they walk in the schoolhouse. And so, it's important for schools to understand that. The other thing they cite in this opinion is a good description of the school library, and they say a student can literally explore the unknown and discover areas of interest and thought not covered by the prescribed curriculum. The student learns that a library is a place to test or expand upon ideas presented to him in or out of the classroom. And that's why the Supreme Court talked about that distinction, is that kids have that right. They've got that right to have that educational vigor. And the Supreme Court said, if you don't give kids that right, you have a weak democracy. Because if you don't have kids battling it out in the sphere of ideas with critical thinking skills, then you have a democracy that suffers. And so that's a really important component when we talk about these, banning books or taking books away off the shelves, is that you're starting to, take tools away from kids that are going to be adults that are going to function in our democracy. And the Founding Fathers were very clear on that.
That's helpful.
If I may, as far as our district is concerned, we encourage students to have conversations with their parents about what they're reading in all classes, and also what they're reading in the library. And we also, along that same line, our teachers have reading lists, and we encourage the students to give that reading list to the parents. So transparency is critical. We don't want parents to be surprised. And so really, I think that's where it's important. And that's really any complaints we've had have come that route, where the child sat down with the parents and started having a conversation to kind of push the parents back on that. So that's where it was. So,
Okay. And that was going to be a follow-up question. I want to get to you, David, on that. But how do you share that information with parents so they know what their children are reading, and so you provide that reading list and share that with the parents? David?
I would just echo a lot of what's already been said. I would tend to say that I think that parents tend to be, and schools as well, both tend to be a little more sensitive with curricular material just because it's required, where in the libraries, it's more of a choice. And so in our libraries, I'll echo what you said, we don't just dump books in our libraries. I mean, we have a selection process that we go through that we're very specific about what we put in our libraries. And so in that process, we try to make our libraries as wide of an expanse as possible for the children to explore. And we know that it's not going to hit everybody where they're comfortable or anything else, but it's very beneficial to those students who will get things out of books that they may not get from a person. And so,
well, and kind of following up that same thought, you all have, there have not been any issues, very few it sounds like. So what do you attribute that success? You've mentioned certainly the books you select to begin with, also the process, and then the interaction with parents and the transparency. Would you kind of talk about that? What do you see as the most important, or is there one most important? And where have you seen, or where do you think you might get the most trouble? John, you kind of alluded with that as school boards not following their own policy.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. If the school board does not follow its own guidelines, that's where you get into problems. We have a lot of, and we try to develop, I think all districts do, more electronic communication with parents, so that now parents can get on a website and they can look at the kids, the actual lessons that they're going to have the next day. So we try to do a lot of pushing information out to the parents as much as possible. And I think it's the transparency that helps, and if you don't have that transparency, and the parents are in the dark, that's where you run into problems.
and I think something that helps with that transparency is your relationship with your community and your relationship with your parents. The better relationship you have with them, the more trust that you instill. I will tell you that I'm sure we have parents out there that question, but I think we have a lot of parents that don't, because they just trust that what we're giving their students to read, what we offer them in our libraries, that we have taken that thoughtful consideration. And I think a lot probably don't get involved because they trust the school district to do the right thing.
I really don't think the real stress is in the library. The stress is in the classroom, like Dave said. And the stress comes when they start reading out loud. And then they come to a particular word.
Right.
And so let's just say where it's at. That's really where the issue is. And so I think there needs to be some professional understanding and expectation around how you introduce material and how you work around the teaching of that material. And so to me, that's the real sensitive area.
Okay. And maybe part of that distinction too with the Supreme Court of two different kind of purposes there.
Right.
And I think it's real important. You talked about, maybe not having some of these issues, but I think you always have to be on guard, because at a moment's notice you can have these issues. So the fact that we've not had a lot of contentious issues Springfield School Board doesn't mean that next week we're not going to, because every week somebody sends out a list of 100 books that you should go check your library and see if these books are in the library, because if they are, they need to be out of that library. Now the people haven't read those books, but by God, they want to get them out of the library. So you got to be vigilant about that, and you got to have policies in place that, like most of these school districts have, that says that we're going to go through a process in selecting what we put in our library, and before we remove it, then there better be a reason, because otherwise, why did we select it in the first place? Right. And so I think even though there hasn't been a problem, I attribute that to a lot of what everybody's talked about, the transparency and the fact that we're in constant communication with our parents. But it does not mean that you can't let your guard down. because at a moment's notice in this day and age, things flare up, and if you start making knee-jerk reactions as a school board, or you start reacting to what's perceived as a kind of a massive revolt or dissension, then I think you're really doing a disservice to your kid.
Okay. Carrie, anything you want to add?
Just on the subject of curriculum choices that teachers make and the input, dealing with developmental readers who haven't had a lot of experience reading, I'm worried that there is so much hesitancy to choose books that might be controversial, that kids are coming to at our level and aren't being exposed to books that they probably could have, should, and would have read. So that's just a question I ask. Are curriculums shying away from those books that might be a little bit controversial? And then you've got kids coming to the college level that really haven't been exposed to this canon of literature that they need to have been exposed to. I see that. I mean,
Okay.
my kids, many of them have never really completed a book.
And kind of a follow-up question to that too. What should be and what is the teacher's right to select curriculum? And what is the library's and librarian's right and responsibility to bring challenging or whatever curriculum? How much latitude are they given in your particular institutions? John?
That, I may have to plead ignorance.
Okay.
Just because I am not that familiar with the day-to-day, and we haven't had any problems, so it's never percolated up to the board.
David?
I'm kind of right there with you. I mean, I know that our inventories of our libraries are carefully selected by several librarians. So, I mean, I guess the power or the responsibility or the choice is great, it's vast, but they make those choices based on informed, I mean, they're the ones that are most knowledgeable to make those decisions. And I think if we were to see many challenges come out of that, then we would question those decisions. But if we're not seeing those challenges, then we have a reason to believe that they're making good, well-informed decisions on what books to put in the library and curriculum, for that matter.
Our instructional materials really comes out of a curriculum review, and what is it now, 8 years, about 6 years? I can't remember, we keep expanding because of the recession. But anyway, there's a major curriculum review, and part of that review is looking at materials, and so that's where a lot of guidelines come out of that. And then, of course, supplemental materials are discussed at departmental levels as far as, and maybe at grade level discussions as well. So there's always a collaboration around reading materials in the instructional piece as well as the library. The library, by the way, every library book we have, there's 3 reviews that are required by the library to look at reviews on that book. And the technology's really helped us with that, by the way, as rather than going all over the place to try to find it. You get it just like that. So.
Carrie, anything?
Just to speak on Springfield Public, my son took advanced placement lit, and there was a selection of books that he could choose from, so it was a matter of choice. And then anytime there was something sexually explicit or whatever, there was an apostrophe, I mean, an asterisk next to it. And of course, knowing my son, that's the kind of book he chose. But that's the only time I can remember any kind of choice in a book in his experience in high school at Springfield Public on that.
Okay. Well, we've got some parents in here this evening. Short of banning books or challenging books, what advice could you give parents about how helping their children to understand the book, and maybe it's a Huck Finn or whatever, and what advice do you give parents in helping them to understand the book, the issues, that sort of thing? So anybody want to take that one first?
I'll take it first.
Okay.
I think anytime, I know whenever my children came home and they were reading a book or had a book in their hand, I always asked them, okay, let's talk about that. What's the takeaway as far as that book is concerned? Really to take the fear out of the situation. And so I would advise parents to treat a book as a resource on life and an opportunity to have a conversation about the situation of life with your children. And that's really the best way to approach that. And so if there's some explicit language in there or something like that, like Huck Finn, I think it's written in its time, and then that's the way you need to take it. You need to go back to that history to have that conversation. And so I really think that's what the parents should be doing. And really, what's interesting is when parents do that, you're going to have kids reading all over the place. They love to read when an adult shows interest in their reading. So anyway, that's my recommendation.
I just follow up on that and say that, read. Want your kids to read anything, read everything, read what they're interested in. Study after study after study shows just kids need to be enthused about reading, whether it's comic books or graphic novels or historical fiction or whatever. I mean, obviously you want to be involved with what your kids are reading, but you want them to read, and I think a powerful book is powerful not because of the sexy language or the bad words or the whatever else is there. It's powerful because of the message it conveys. So, and once you've read that book, all the bad words and the racy language kind of evaporate, and you remember the powerful message of the book. The Kite Runner is a great example. It's a wonderful book, extremely powerful book. Sure, it's got some scenes in it that are disturbing, but but when you come away from it, you come away as that's a powerful book. And it's a powerful look into a society that most of us probably don't get into. And that's one of the things that we talk about with books, is that it allows people to try on different identities. It allows people to try out different religions and different ways of thinking about different issues. And if you don't give people that opportunity, and you don't give kids that opportunity at an early age, then what kind of adults are they going to be?
As a follow-up to the Kite Runner, I did have a student this last week who told me, this is the first time I've ever understood that not all Islamic people are radical terrorists. He said, I honestly grew up in a small Missouri town thinking that all Muslims were radicals. And Hosseini, the author himself, is such an educated, articulate person, so that introduction was really eye-opening to him. So that's what the glory of working together through a book is about. He also, the coolest thing, I'm sorry, I love teaching. The book talks about naan, which is the bread that they eat, and he went to Gem of India and sat down and just ordered naan. So they kind of looked at me weird. They said usually people eat naan with their meal, but just that kind of experience and outflow of reading together is the kind of joy you experience when you read as a community of readers, not just each pick their own book, because there's really not that joint conversation.
David or John, anything to add about helping parents?
I just wanted to say share. I mean, I know people have book clubs. I know people meet to discuss books as they read. And if you do that with your child as a parent, that child's going to blossom in his or her experience in that reading. It's going to improve comprehension, because they're going to want to read and understand what they're reading, so that they can then come back and talk to you. With my kids, I haven't always had the opportunity to take the time to read what they're reading, but I'll still be, you articulated it very well, to be able to just say, well, tell me about it and talk to me. I'm not reading it with you, but talk to me about it. And they would be excited about getting on with it and into the book, so they could tell me something next. And it's powerful.
The fact that they do that, they might share their dating experience with you. just kind of open them up.
Well, yeah, while they're talking. Such a rarity.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. This is kind of changing gears, and certainly an issue I feel strongly about. How has the rise of electronic communication created new challenges in schools in terms of what students have access to? Carrie? See you rolling your eyes.
I teach in a computer classroom at OTC, so my biggest challenge is to make sure they're not on Facebook or reading other things while. And plus the amount of time. I mean, they say as much as 9 hours a day, kids are involved in some kind of electronic medium. So the challenge. But on that subject, I'm so excited about e-readers, because I think that's a way to capture these kids, I have a daughter that's 13 and she loves the e-reader, and it has hugely expanded her vocabulary because that touch of the screen on that word and that pops up, and so it has been a great asset, and I'm encouraging my kids in the classroom as much as I can. But I sound like a salesperson for the Nook because that's what I have. But I think it's wonderful. I'm not afraid of it.
We're trying to push technology as much as we can with inside the classroom and outside the classroom, and use technology as much as you can to interact with the parents, so that the parents can interact with the teachers and the teachers can interact with the parents in very easily, so that it's a lot easier than trying to get somebody on the phone with all email communication back and forth between the parents and teachers. It makes it a lot easier, a lot faster. We're really trying to push. We're even looking at a one-to-one at some point. Have every student. We're pushing it down into the 4th grade. Working on computer labs. So we're trying to push it down as far as we can. And if you get to the point where every student has access to a computer, that opens up a lot of possibilities. And there's even, I've seen some interesting philosophizing on how do we do future classrooms. Do we have to do all teaching in the classroom? What if they did it at home? And then they came in the classroom and it was more of a summary while they're in the classroom. So by having all of these electronics, I think it is going to open it up to different ways for students to be able to learn, so that they can, rather than put them in a little box and say, okay, everybody has to learn it this way, let them individualize it, and they end up being faster learners because they're doing it in some way that they like.
And the access issue, to me, is a very interesting one because there's access to so much more electronically than there is in any school library or curriculum. So you want to take a stab at that?
You talk about the electronic media. I mean, with the touch of a button, you can get Google Books now. And,
right.
Almost every book that's been banned in a library, at the touch of a button, a kid can read, for free. If it's been banned before 30, whatever the copyright law. So, this may be, whether you ban a book, whether you don't ban a book, it's going to be kind of moot in a while because kids are going to have so much access all the time. And so the more important question is, do you teach your kids how to approach literature and how to approach books and how to be critical thinkers about it, and how to figure out for themselves what's good and important and what's not and fluff. And so, with technology, I think it's going to be here to stay. And, I've seen some national conferences where you see teachers that use it in a seamless way, where they create wikis and they have their history students go into original source materials, which, strange thought for a history class, but they're actually going to the source material, the Constitution, for example, and reading it as opposed to, what Rush Limbaugh says about it or what MSNBC says about it, and say, well, this is what the Constitution actually says. So you can really do some wonderful lesson plannings with all this new technology. I think you have to use it as an opportunity as opposed to, how are we going to tamp down all these ways that kids can get this dirty content on the web, because they're going to be able to. It's teaching the kids to, know what's right and wrong.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there as far as right and wrong with the ethics around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I think civility has a lot to do with that as well. My 2-year-old granddaughter, I was with her the last couple of days, and so my wife bought an iPad yesterday, and so she put all her pictures on there, and of course we have a grandson now that's 8 weeks old. Those two don't get along. Okay? And so she was able to bring up Blues Clues, whatever it is. Blues Clues. Okay, well, I never heard of it before, but anyway, she brought it up. Then she saw these pictures, and she started destroying all the pictures of our grandson. I couldn't believe she could do that. She was destroying it. So before she could even talk, she was managing and manipulating my life. There's where technology is.
Yeah.
To me, it's like a foreign language. You know, if you learn it early, it's part of your system. The same thing is true for ethics. The same thing is true for morals. And so I think as parents, that's our job. Okay, it's not the school's job, because I don't want the schools telling my kids what's right and wrong necessarily, except to maybe in extreme cases. So that's where I think technology has taken us. And so I think it's still figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. David?
They're,
You're the tech guy.
they're in my world. I've been biting my tongue on this one all night, because it doesn't matter what we ban and what we censor or however you want to look at that. The information is out there. Yeah, I mean, it's just out there, and it's going to be available to our children. Either, I mean, it's going to be available to them in our homes, and we can help monitor that, or when they get out of our homes, we're not going to be able to monitor that. And so I think the teaching at home, what's right and wrong, what your ethics are, those types of things are best done in the home. And then a child, an adult, young adult, can then make better decisions based on things that are going to hit them anyway. And the other thing I just wanted to bring up was 21st century skills are so important, and one of the pieces of that 21st century skill set is information literacy. And I think it's more important now than ever before. We've always had to teach, why we have sources. When we use a source that we reference and we say what that source was. Well, it used to be the encyclopedia or whatever it was. Well, now we have to teach kids not only that there is information out there, but how to verify that information is correct. Because fiction and nonfiction, you can find a lot of fiction in nonfiction. People will read Wikipedia and it's the Bible. I mean, whatever's written is there. Anybody can and I feel very firm, just so adamant about that, because we need to teach our children not to just to view things and believe it because they read it, but to research it and know how to research and how to find out fact from fiction.
I think the technology is giving us more truth. I walked into a science lab last year. We have smart boards, and the science teacher was having a conversation with a university professor out of Berkeley about architectural structure and earthquakes. And the kids were having that same conversation. You can't beat that.
Right.
That's the raw source. Well, today, on the web now, you can see the C-scrolls. You can't beat that source either. So to me, I think we're going to see more truth come out of it than anyways.
One follow-up, and then we'll go to questions just on that subject, is what is the role, if any, or responsibility, if any, to tell your students, to help your students understand social media? And again, I know Norm and I were in a conversation with a professor at a local college who said, she brought up colleges are now using Facebook to look at their student applicants, employers look at it. And she said, when I share that with my students, they don't say, oh, I'll clean it up. What they say is, that's my private life. They have no right to check out there. And so they get very indignant versus this realization. So how is there a role for the schools to play in helping this new technology not be a harm as it is so often? David, you want to?
Education. I mean, it's not only that we choose to do that, but now even with, I'm trying to say, we're now required to. We have the internet safety classes are now required in all public schools. And so through that, we teach social media and how to keep yourself safe, but we also deal with ethics of social media and how when you put something out there, it's not just out there until you take it off. When you take it off, it's still out there. And for each employers, I found it very interesting that just recently we had a graduate who went for a job interview. They asked to be friended on Facebook, and it was just a requirement of the interview process. Now, they didn't have to give friendship, but they also didn't have to get interviewed either.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know the legal aspects, but I know that.
Yeah. Andy?
I think you're right. I mean, you have to help kids through this. I mean, unfortunately, if you look at the brain science and you realize that kids until they're about 22 really don't make decisions based on a lot of empirical data. And, they're not making smart long-term decisions.
Right.
Their prefrontal lobe is just not, developed enough. So, but in terms of, helping them that path, you got to make sure as a district, you hope anyway, that the information you're giving to them is geared to in a way that they're going to respond to it, and and has some empirical data behind it that says, yeah, when you teach it in this way, kids respond to it, as opposed to don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, because they're going to ignore it and go on what they're doing before. So.
And
Tell
yeah,
them don't do something, that's a surefire way to get them to do it.
I made the mistake of sharing that with my son one time about, your brain doesn't develop till you're 22, so that from then on, that's what he always blamed when he'd make a bonehead decision. What's my brain? Parents, you might want to watch.
On a suggestion, National Geographic this month has a fascinating article on the teenage brain. It's the feature article, and it's really good. So
And I think
was
boys
gonna
are a
make
couple
my-
years.
They are, yeah.
I was going to make all my
Same
teenagers in the class read that.
Yeah. Well, let's open it up for questions. We have some time. Yes, sir.
I would like to suggest that the educators remember the boards that the quickest way to get a child to read a book is to ban it or restrict it. Let me give you an example. I hate to admit it in this group of readers, but I had not read Slaughterhouse-Five, and so about 6 weeks ago I went to the library to get it. I was on a waiting list for 5 weeks. I thought, okay, I'll go to, I'm talking about the 3 books, the 3 Republic books now. Speak. I think that was 4 weeks. 20 Boys Summer, 3 or 4 weeks. So I went to the old downtown library, Central Library. They have a youth section on the 2nd floor, and I was told that Speak and 20 Boys Summer are there. It wasn't. That was the youth section. So again, if you ban a book, people will read it, whether they're adults or children. So just tell them that it's on the restricted list, they can't read it. Secondly, I think there have been some allusions to offensive language, whatever that is, because what's offensive to me is not offensive to you, and I don't know how you set up criteria to define offensiveness. And there have been some allusions to sex, and you can read a novel or watch television or go to the movies and see more sex than you'll ever read about. But there's another kind of offensiveness, and that's, I think, of Samuel Clemens and the use of the N-word. Not too long ago, I think there was a professor who rewrote a part of Clemens' books. It took all the references to Negroes out. I grew up in the 30s, it was a very popular word, that's what you used. In the 1800s, that's what you used, and it exposed you to the culture at that time. That's the way people lived, it's what they thought, that's the way they lived. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to follow up on the electronic question by an apology for electronic rudeness of my phone door. There are advantages and there are disadvantages. But I would like to ask, how do you foresee the change in academic freedom, particularly in high schools and, well, on down to elementary, with the availability of the information that's on the internet? There were certain things that academically you simply did not teach because it was inappropriate for that age child. Now, it's there, as you say, anything can be found. So how do you deal with that in terms of your teachers?
Well, I think the one thing you do is, as different people have talked about, is you try to instill as much, knowledge in your student base, so that they're able to kind of parse out, what is valid and what's not valid, and they're able, and hopefully for your teachers, you steer them toward, an interest in things that they can find outside of, the classroom. But I agree. I mean, I think it's going to open up a whole new realm of the availability of information. But I think you can see it two ways. You can see it as an opportunity to further enrich and get these kids thinking about all sorts of new things, or as something that you fear, you know. And a lot of people fear that, well, my kid's going to find something on the internet or find something in a library that is going to be objectionable, and you know, they can find a lot more of it on MTV or whatever else, you know, that's objectionable to me anyway. But I think it's a concern.
I think the bottom line is that you always need to have a conversation and build up a relationship with that child. Teacher-child relationship needs to be really strong trust in that relationship. So therefore, when any kind of technology is brought into that picture, the child's going to feel comfortable with certain involvement in certain levels of technology and uncomfortable in other parts because that'll offend the teacher. In my work with high school kids, it's always that there's a stronger relationship, they're going to protect the relationship between their peers and the teacher more so than they're going to try to explore into inappropriate areas. So to me, it's all about building relationships and then building trust around it.
One quick follow-up there. What about between the teachers and their supervisors, the administrators, who are supervising for academic freedom and challenges?
I always believe in autonomy. I do think that there needs to be good collaboration. Again, I think it's the same thing as with the teacher and the student. There needs to be a good conversation about, and a healthy conversation, collaborative type of conversation around the whole point of ethics, around the whole point of what's appropriate, and really what's going to help be creative and critical as far as thinking is concerned. And I think that's what's important. So then you let it go. The autonomy, the teacher, it's their classroom and their kids.
Any others want to follow up on that question?
I'm going to plead ignorance.
Okay. Are there any other questions that anyone might have? Okay, please.
I would like to hear responses from each of the school districts about how you would handle a complaint made by a member of the community about a title or more than one title in your library if that member had no children in school.
To me, it's they need to fill out this.
Fill out the form.
Yeah, to me, it's all the same. They're part of the community, and so then eventually there's a review, the whole process. I believe our policy is our policy that clear where a community person can come forward. I believe, and when we do our own review of curriculum and purchases, community is invited to the table to review those as well. So we work for the community. So
The policy refers to that as a patron, so the patron does not have to be a parent.
Do you give the same weighting to a patron as you do a parent? As far as the issue, or is there a different?
I don't think the policy says anything about it. I mean,
Okay.
whoever brings it up, the idea is you look at the piece of material in question and you hold it up to the light and say, why do we choose this and is it appropriate? And I think a lot of these things, sometimes they are age appropriate, and that's a valid concern. You know, there are certain ages that don't need to have certain material. You see that, and I think you see that, time and time again, so.
Kathleen?
I have a question for Carrie. I think you present a really interesting perspective in that we've been talking about parents and concerned citizens bringing challenges, but it's interesting to hear that one of your adult students is concerned about reading material. Where do you think you're going to take this? Are you just going to offer her an alternative?
Well, her comment was, well, I have to have it for class, and I guess I'll go ahead and read it. So I'm hoping that over the course of time, she'll come around and understand the value of communally reading a book as an experience, and that, there will be some enlightenment change. So that's just my hope, but this is a trial. This semester is the first time we've ever done this, so it'll be interesting to see the follow-up on it.
I think a book that really helps set the standards is To Kill a Mockingbird. And I think that's something that should be read every year to remind people about relationships and how important it is.
And kind of a follow-up to Kathleen's question, there are studies out there that say that when we have an opinion about something, a political opinion, whatever, that we tend to listen to media, read stories that parrot back the opinion to us. So conservatives tend to watch Fox News, listen to Rush Limbaugh. Liberals tend to watch MSNBC or watch The Daily Show, and their opinions are kind of parroted back to them. There's actually other studies that suggest that when somebody that is neutral talks to you about an issue, that you remember the things you already believe, and you restore them in a more secure part of your brain than the stuff that you don't believe. So it may be valid information, but you are filtering it out based on your preconceived opinion. So when somebody says, I don't like, reading about something, it strikes me as you need to press that, because you need to read about things that differ and think about things that are different than your preconceived notions, because we already have way too much of that in this society, where people have an opinion, stick with it, talk to other people that have the same opinion, and parrot it back to them, and feel further or more and more sure of their opinion. And if we don't get past that as a country, we're in for some major surprises, I think.
I think the Murdoch situation is where it might have gone too far, and that so to me there is a balance, but when it starts going into individual private lives that are needing to be protected, then we have some issues as far as censorship, and I do think that's where the technology might be a problem. So.
Well, this has been a great evening. I appreciate you all being here. I've certainly learned a lot, and this has been a great discussion. And again, I want to thank our panelists. And I want to thank our audience for coming to share and having a great civil dialogue about something we're passionate about. We need more of these. Thanks, and have a good evening. We'll go to our card, and we'll find the Cardinals are up 5-0. Thanks. Have a good evening.
Do you write the column?
I do.
I thought you did.
Turn this off here. That's okay.